On this special edition of Let's Explore This, we are going to be exploring a river, the Rio Grande River, more specifically, the reasons behind its 2025 listing as one of that year's most endangered rivers. American Rivers, an organization devoted exclusively to river conservation, every year puts out a list of that year's 10 most endangered rivers. In 2025, one of those rivers just so happened to be the Rio Grande, and I want to find out why. The Rio Grande happened to be a river I needed to cross on my way back to the East Coast from the West. Because of that, I decided to embark on a little trip to see what is going on. It appears the stretch of river in question was that part which flows through Texas. Unfortunately, that is not the part I was able to come across. That part of the river I was most closest to was that stretch which flows through New Mexico. So, what does that mean? Well, it means all of the footage I was able to shoot was not in Texas, but in New Mexico. That includes not only sights of the river around Albuquerque, but also a good amount of footage from a rafting trip I embarked on. That trip, called the Race Course, took me on a stretch of Class 2 and Class 3 rapids. A bit exciting, but not overly intense. The real scope of this episode, however, is the threats the Rio Grande was facing in 2025. The main document used for the information presented in this episode is going to be from this report from American Rivers itself. Other sources might be incorporated into the mix as necessary, mainly if there is a need to better illustrate what is being mentioned in the report or to show any site that I feel needs to be shown, but one that I was not able to come across. You know how it is. All sources I use will be listed at the very end. Okay, so for those of you that do not know, the Rio Grande River, it is an icon of the West and the lifeblood of the American Southwest. It provides water and life to over 6 million people. The river is a vital economic, cultural, and ecological resource for people and for wildlife of the United States and of Mexico. Despite its immense value to people and heritage, however, the river has been under constant threat for decades. For decades. Wow. That means it has been under threat well before 2025. Yikes. Today, in 2025, though, the danger is nowhere more urgent than in the lower Rio Grande Basin. That is where water scarcity, pollution, and overallocation have come together to harm not only the river, but also the communities that rely on it. Yes, many communities in New Mexico and in Texas, and even in a couple of other states, do rely on and need this river. The recent Minute 331 agreement established a binational environmental working group, creating a critical opportunity to advance conservation efforts and to advocate for much-needed federal funding to ensure that the river can continue to support nature and the people who so depend on it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this massive river itself. Massive? Well, it must be. It's called Rio Grande, Spanish for Big River. The Rio Grande, also known as the Rio Bravo del Norte in Mexico, is the third longest river in the United States and the source of water for over 6 million people. For those in its lower basin, it is often the only source of drinking water. So, tell me, where does the Rio Grande start? No. Yes, I am in New Mexico right now, but no. The Rio Grande starts in another state. From its headwaters in the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, the main stem of the Rio Grande stretches approximately just under 2,000 miles through diverse geographies of forest and desert, of cliffs and flatlands, until it reaches its final destination at the Gulf. The Gulf of Mexico, that is, not the Gulf of America. The springs and streams that feed the mighty Rio Grande not only support an invaluable agricultural economy, but also provide a crucial stop for several of the Western Hemisphere's largest migratory flyways. They are home to various highly prized birds and pollinators, including, yes, the endangered monarch butterfly. South Texans, they do rely on the Rio Grande and its associated reservoirs of Amistad and of Falcon for their drinking water. Furthermore, these reservoirs also aim to serve as critical recreational and ecological assets. Despite this, investment in the Rio Grande Basin still does remain low compared to other major United States river systems. Now, why don't we discuss the threat or threats this river is currently facing? So, severe water scarcity. It is driven by prolonged drought, intensifying heat, and unsustainable water use. And that has left the Rio Grande in a near-permanent, human-induced mega-drought, threatening all life that depends on it. Interestingly, when I was in Albuquerque, I was glad to see water in the river. A month or so after I left, reportedly, little to no water was flowing there. If that is true, that much water disappearing, that is not natural. The river frequently runs dry in Big Bend National Park, changing the ecological integrity and disrupting that region's agricultural production. Furthermore, it jeopardizes clean and reliable drinking water for the hundreds of communities and for the millions of people in its lower basin. Today, in 2025, reportedly, less than 1/5 of the river's flows reach the sea. I guess the horrible fate of the Colorado River has yet to sink in, I guess. However, a recent agreement between the United States and Mexico does present a major opportunity to enhance river flows and water security for both people and wildlife. The International Boundary and Water Commission, or the IBWC, is a federal agency that oversees the river through treaties. It has been recently signed as Minute 331. So, what does this agreement do? Well, it focuses on improving the reliability of river flows and establishes a long-awaited binational environmental working group, allowing for coordinated conservation efforts, scientific assessments, and water management strategies. That may be all good for sure. Still, something here does not seem to be working. You see, despite that progress, the Rio Grande, it has received little to no federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, while other domestic river basins have managed to secure billions for water conservation and infrastructure. Certainly, those other river basins do deserve what they can get, but without similar investment for this very river, restoration efforts here will remain far more underfunded. The lack of public engagement opportunities for Minute 331's implementation further limits community involvement in shaping the river's future. IBWC data, it does show that water inflows into the Rio Grande have diminished by more than 30%, yet the causes remain insufficiently studied. Regardless, if the federal government does not prioritize investments in this river, continued neglect will further threaten the communities and the ecosystems that rely on it. So, some might then ask, what can be done? Well, it has to be a cooperative, a collaborative effort, one that will need to include not one, but two countries. It is essential that Mexico, the United States, and the river's water users build on their collaborative efforts and continue working together to not only fund but also implement key provisions of Minute 331. By doing so, they can help not only sustain the Rio Grande's flow, but also ensure water security for people, for farms, and for the environment. You know, it should not be that hard to infer that a thriving river supports thriving communities. That only means that protecting this river here, the Rio Grande, that will mean helping to secure clean and reliable drinking water for millions while also restoring the natural hydrological functions that are so beneficial to a healthy river.
Now, people, if you ever see these right here, these plants here, believe me, you do not want to touch those. If you do, that would not be good. You don't want to touch those. I don't think they have those in North Carolina, but they certainly have them here. There's like one there, moving on down, I think, and there's one there. You don't want to touch those.
We believe to be a real petroglyph.
How about these over here on this side?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. But this lizard one here is the one that's... This lizard one?
That's a in my book, that's a maybe. It's hard to
Maybe.
Therefore, we must urge federal policymakers to prioritize dedicated funding for the Rio Grande. Their support is critical in securing those much-needed federal appropriations. Investments, too, are critical for conservation efforts, for water security, and for not only ongoing but also future repairs of Amistad Dam. Those are so vital for the region's water supply and safety. Moreover, investments and prioritization not only in water quality but also in access can further increase recreational uses. Overall, a far more balanced approach between security and ecology, that is what will shift the river's narrative into a more uplifting and positive light. For the Rio Grande, in 2025, this has been Fedora Bones, who now must move on to the next destination, wherever that might be.